in the course of your reporting, did you find that a lot of Americans were just getting up to speed about ISI and then they'd rotate out? There were some interesting characters in the book who came through, Peter Lavoie and people that have numerous years, and even Petraeus would say, we need officers to stay here 5 years. Who wants to sign up first? And I don't know how many people raised their hand, but he couldn't get that core of veterans. That it takes a long time to understand this region. And I think the Americans continued to just not be able to trust themselves, and also certainly not trust the Pakistani intelligence and the military. So this complicity and obfuscation is also a profession in South Asia, and you almost need a degree in it.
Yeah, I mean, at the CIA too. I mean, no, I think you're right. I think there's a phrase in the book someplace that there was maybe a basketball team's worth of people who really, in the government, who really understood how Pakistan worked and who had the clearances to see all the information that was flowing through. Peter Lavoie was one. But I think the failure to understand ISI went through several phases in the US experience of the war that's still going on. So the first was immediately after September 11th. The only members of the Bush administration's cabinet that had personal experience of either Pakistan or Afghanistan were Colin Powell and Richard Armitage at the State Department, who had worked with Pakistan during the first Gulf War, Colin Powell then in the military. So their whole vision of the region was distorted by their sense that the Pakistan army was the most important potential partner here. And they wanted to believe that Pervez Musharraf was sincere in flipping sides and abandoning the Taliban. The second phase was one of distraction caused primarily by the Iraq War, when the whole Bush administration, after 2003, turned its attention to a suddenly deteriorating
2002 they started.
But in 2002 they started planning, 2003 the main event, and then by 2004, 2005, as the Iraq War deteriorated, it became by far the #1 priority in the Bush administration, to the extent that they turned security in Afghanistan over to NATO partners as a way to concentrate their forces and attention in Iraq. And so this is the period where I think ISI goes back into action. I think in the first year after the fall of the Taliban, Musharraf was cautious. He was willing to cooperate with CIA in capturing al-Qaeda, and even some Taliban leaders turning them over, letting them be shipped off to Guantanamo. But by 2004, 2005, as the US turned Afghanistan over to Canada, the Dutch, the Pakistani read was, okay, we're already at the post-American moment. We knew this was coming. They come and go. Now they're going again. And so we need to get back to managing our own security along this big western frontier. And I think another factor in the Pakistani calculus was around this time, 2006, the US cut this huge nuclear deal with India, which we basically forgave India for breaking out of the non-proliferation system and offered them lots of civilian aid, but as importantly, legitimacy. And we said to the Pakistanis at the same time, you're not getting this deal because of your record of nuclear smuggling, which they have. They have a record of nuclear smuggling. So I think at the Corps Command at that point, the conversation felt like, you made yourself plain. India is your strategic partner for the 21st century. We're a transactional partner. You come and go. You leave us with the mess that you create. In this case, we had attacked Afghanistan and caused hundreds of al-Qaeda members to flee into Pakistan, where they were already hooking up with local groups and starting to create havoc, eventually created a massive domestic insurgency in Pakistan against the Pakistani state. So there was no sentimentality in ISI.
But they were tapping into the communications of ISI, weren't they?
Yeah, they were listening to them, and then the next phase is they start to get a grip on what's going on. So the Taliban start coming back in Afghanistan. They start whacking the British in Helmand, who thought they were coming in for a peacekeeping mission. Suddenly they're in a full-blown counterinsurgency for which they're not prepared. They start whacking the Canadians in Kandahar, and Condoleezza Rice, who is I think probably the first in the Bush administration to get a grip on what's going on, she sends David Kilcullen and Elliot Cohen, a bunch of other people out to the war to study it. And Kilcullen comes back and he says, he's an ex-Australian Army officer, And he comes back and he says, look, I mean, the Taliban units that are fighting the Canadians in Kandahar, they are sniping. That's not casual activity. They are wearing uniforms with insignia. They are maneuvering in the field. That suggests, significant professional training. But think about it, 2006, this is not a message anybody in the Situation Room wants to hear. They are all Iraq all the time, and Iraq looks like it's going to, the bottom. And so I would say it was not until, in other words, there was a blindness, some of it willful, some of it incidental to the Iraq distraction. By 2008, the US system had come to understand that ISI was on the other side of the war. But at that point, the question was, what are you really going to do about it? Because at that point, Pakistan was also falling apart. Benazir Bhutto has been assassinated.
The Red Mosque,
the Red Mosque, and you remember, I always remind myself of that spring of 2009 when the Pakistani Taliban moved out of Swat into Bunair, and it looked like they were going to walk into Islamabad.
They were just 80 kilometers away.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
There was such a panic about that. I mean, it was a moment when the nightmare scenario of a country with 100+ nuclear weapons falling into the hands of radicals of unknown ambitions seemed, not imminent, but not completely out of the question. And so there was a limit to how much pressure they were willing to put on the Pakistani state. At that point, the strategy was we should actually be rebuilding the Pakistani state so that we can regain some measure of security.